Welcome to the Exhaust Notes Podcast.
What is good, everyone? Welcome back to the Exhaust Notes Podcast. My name's Nick. I'm with my guys Todd and Rowett to talk about one of the craziest F1 seasons we've had in the last at least 2 years. I don't want to go too far back because it's kind of hard to top that, but we were just doing a little recap mentally here before the show, and it was a good season. So we got a lot to talk about. What's good, guys?
A lot is good, all things considered, and that ties into the pre-gaming we were talking about, where we're coming up with NPR equivalents for all of Nick's podcasts. It's been a crazy season. It's been crazy dominant from one person, but it's also been crazy intriguing, because as we were kind of going through the numbers in terms of backing up our hot takes, whether it'll be in this episode or the next episode you hear, there is a bit of intrigue. You just need to know where to look, and that's kind of been an overarching theme of Formula One in the last 3 years, I would say. What do you think, Todd?
Oh, man. I think if you took out one Max a million Verstappen, this was a really good year. Like, I don't know if we'll ever see, like, going back to the Max thing, I don't know if we'll ever see that level of dominance again. That surpassed, like, 2018, 2019 Lewis dominance by a long shot. That was amazing in its own right, all the records he set. But if you take that out, the battle for P2 through P6, 7, whatever we were talking about earlier, was really good. The changes to the constructors over the season, it was a really good year.
Yeah, honestly, now that we're saying this out loud, I think I went into this season obviously go into it a little bit optimistic, but I went into this season a little more pessimistic than I normally would because Max just looked like he was going to kill everyone. And it turned out way better than, I mean, he did, but like the season was still really entertaining. It's a lot like Vegas, to be honest. Like, I think we all thought Vegas was like a shit show. I'm pretty sure our last episode, I titled it something about Vegas shit show has begun or something. And now here we are, like a couple weeks later, season's over. And like looking back, the Vegas race itself, potentially the best race of the year, if not the best race of the last few years for me. Like there was just so much action aside from Max. So
no, I agree with that. Vegas was a startling amount of fun, and much like going to Vegas for the first time as a human being, it is a lot of fun. I think the hangover comes when you keep going back every so often, so the aging of Vegas was going to be a very interesting topic to follow for the next couple of years. But the other thing that we were all chatting about was the fact that for me, what intrigued me the most about Vegas was the fact that Formula One drivers are creatures of habit. We all know about this. They all like to brag about how they can drive any track blindfolded because the sheer amount of time they spend in simulators or actually being in the car and running those races, they've got it down to a science. And it's very refreshing and unique to see all 20 of these dudes hop on a track for the very first time in a racing-like setting and figure shit out. Because it's like being a parent. There are moments where you're like, oh no, don't put your hand down there. You just pooped. And then there are other moments like, you just made a complete sentence. Who are you?
As a father to a 1.5-year-old, I understand that reference so well. You don't understand. You have no idea.
Are you telling me you fell in love with the Coco?
Yes, as much as Young Dolph loves it. Yeah, that was Young Dolph, right?
No, it was OT Genesis, sir.
OT Genesis. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Of other fame as cut it. That race. So I have to ask this question because I went on a rant. I think we were actually recording the last podcast during Free Practice 1.
Yep.
And I went on a rant about how much of a spectacle shit show it was. Now that you've had time to digest that event, do you agree, disagree? Because I'm still on the train, and I talked to Trev about this in the Discord actually just a couple of days ago. I still hate that like spectacle. I know that I'm not the everyman F1 fan. Like I'm a nerd and I want to talk about, the
porpoising.
Yeah, porpoising and cooling ducts and, or the just weird technical garbage that most people don't care about. But the spectacle, like if you're going to get people into a race of any sort, motorsport of any sort, like the racing itself has to be good. And granted, the F1 race was, but like everything surrounding it, I still hate so much. So what do you guys think? Did you guys like the whole like player entrances and Michael Buffer? Oh my God, that moment with Michael Buffer and Sergio Perez, best moment of the season.
That was painful.
That is why I love that race. If you can give me one random driver a year having to be subjugated to that, then I'm all in. You can have that race as long as you want. I mean, the only thing missing to me was Wayne Newton awkwardly serenading Max Verstappen after he won the race. Like that would have been great.
It's not a
Sure to be loved by. No, that's Manilow, isn't it?
I
Yeah,
have
it's
no
Manilow.
idea.
Yeah.
Is it Manilow?
I think so. I actually think hologram. I'm just happy that hologram Sinatra didn't show up at some point because
Don't give him ideas, Nick. That sounds like the most Liberty Media thing ever.
yeah. Well, so that and like the other staple when you're in Vegas is all of the stripper flyers that they're trying to hand to you.
The heartbeat of Vegas, as somebody once pointed out to me.
Yes. I'm surprised that we didn't see that somehow make its way on screen or into the gamut that is the Vegas shit show.
Now that is an idea that I want to see. Random person that passes out said stripper flyers. If you can find an overpass and just make that rain over the track during the race somehow.
No. I'll one up you. There's a sphere in the middle of that race course. I just need to see images of scantily clad women, or have different laps sponsored. Like these next 5 laps are sponsored by Harry's
Spearmint
Ho,
Rhino.
the Spearmint Rhino, Ballers.
Yes.
I mean,
Thunder
it
from
did
Down Under.
seem like the car ride after the race was like should have went straight to a strip club and not to the podium, right? Or not to the interviews. Like that was a very awesomely awkward moment of like Max and Checo and Lando, right? Was it Lando? Yeah. Wait,
Did he get P3?
I'll look it up.
Okay.
Listeners, it's been a minute. We're trying to get our chemistry right. So as I look up who got P3, Nick, continue with your point.
basically the back
Leclerc,
of a Rolls
Sergio.
Royce.
Yeah.
It's just like so awkward, and it's like these guys, they barely want to hang out in that room after the races when it's a normal room on their own. But then sitting awkwardly in the back of a Rolls Royce, where it looks like Max is almost sitting on their laps, and Sergio is just like staring off into the abyss, like contemplating on whether or not he'll be back next season. Like it was just like also painful, also sad to say it, great entertainment.
By the way, the podium for the Vegas race was Max Verstappen in his customary first, Charles Leclerc in second, and Sergio in third.
Don't
Looks
forget
like
Lando.
Bestie.
Yeah, SD Bestie was number 4, but Lando, I believe, wasn't that the race he was yeah, he didn't finish.
Yeah, that's the wreck. Yep.
DNF. Probably, honestly, the difference between him getting P4 and P7. Since he lost
In the overall standings, listener, I
mean,
didn't want you to think that Todd had a concussion and said, yeah, if he finished, he would have been at P4. But
yes. Sorry, that was totally a reference to our pre-show ramble.
And I think that's an important point to make, though. Like you said, so I pulled it up. We got Max with 575 points, Sergio with 285, Lewis with 234, Fernando Alonso with 206, Charles Leclerc with 206, Lando Norris with 205, Carlos Sainz with 200, and George Russell with 175. Like you're talking about, roughly 60 points between third and eighth, and roughly 100 points between second and eighth. I don't think we've had that tight of racing in the midfield, or the top of the midfield, I should say.
the upper midfield, yep.
Yeah, in a long time. Like I can't think of a time where like really like outside of Max, anybody could have won a race at any moment the last half of the season.
So let me ask you this, Nick, because I think if there was exhaust notes bingo, we all have our verbal crutches and phrases we like to rely on. Do you feel that we truly got the competitive nature that Formula One, Liberty Media, everybody in between and everywhere else were able to achieve with these new regulations, because I think early returns are good.
So I would say this season was great for guys like Todd and I, who are like really into the racing aspect of it, right? Because there was a lot of great races. There was a lot of back and forth on the points. Like there was a lot of surprises, right? We both looked at the driver standings before the show, and we're like, there's definitely things that we saw that we didn't actually realize happened. I think that is a beautiful thing. It's really hard to say that like overall it was great, because nothing will ever touch Max and Lewis for the everyday fan or the casual fan, right? Like people want to see a winner, they want to see the battle for first. Like that's what most fans look for in every form of sports, right? And I think that's the toughest part about racing is like if somebody is dominant like that, and like frankly, like we've kind of been in like a long era of dominance, right? Like we've had Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, I don't know what they have, but they've got, let's say 80% or more of the titles in the last 15, 20 years, however far back we can go with that, probably to 06, something like that. So I think it's a tough question to answer, but like that would be kind of the way I look at it, is like, it was great for fans of motorsports. I think there's a lot of entertainment for people that are casual fans, but I don't think it'll ever touch the like, circus that Max and Lewis put on back and forth, a few years back. What do you think, Todd?
2009. From then on, it's been either Red Bull or Mercedes.
2009. So
Sebastian was
14,
2009 through 13, and then 14 was Lewis, except for that one Nico year in 2016. And since then, it's been Max. We had a couple of years, because before that it was Schumacher. So F1's always kind of been that way. There's always that one dominant driver with the dominant team at the right time, But I like you kind of just stated. It was. I also went into the season with like a pessimism, just like, okay, is Red Bull going to win by 30 seconds or 40 seconds every race? And there was a lot of that, right? We definitely saw a lot of that. But there was also races where, like, on pace, people overtook Max for the lead. So there was like a little bit of a fight, kind of. But from P2 down, it was kind of a crapshoot. What week is, like what week and what constructor is having a good week of that, of the last season. So overall, I think it was a really good season. There was definitely some shite races we saw. Like we went from the best race of the season in Vegas to probably the worst race of the season in Abu Dhabi. Would you guys agree? Like there was almost nothing happening in that race. Yeah. Like that's generally not a big overtake track anyway. And they're, they have enough money to just be pay to be the last race of the season. But it kind of shows the juxtaposition of what our season was. Like we had, some really, really good races in there. Monaco, Silverstone. Monza didn't happen because of the rain.
Yeah,
I can't stand the rain, like Missy Elliott said.
But there was some good races in there, and just I feel like the most interesting part was the constructors battle. Like we started the season with dominance, so to speak, for P2 with Aston Martin, and then it moved on to Ferrari briefly, and then it was kind of back and forth between them until the midway point of the season, and then McLaren came out of nowhere. It was just like, oh hi, we're second best now, and then it was slipping back and forth,
It was, and I think this is a point I made in a previous episode, which was this season for me will be characterized by it was broken up into trimesters. In the first trimester, you thought Aston Martin would be the team that would give Max the run for the money. Ferrari had a moment of competence every now and then. Mercedes also had an extended period of, hey, they look professional. They might be able to get something out of it. But I like this notion that if you remove Max Verstappen from this season, this might have been the most competitive and most entertaining, because it truly felt like there were 3 teams that could have easily made a claim for second place in the constructors, and that's the new first as far as I'm concerned. So good on you, Liberty Media.
Yeah,
almost 4 teams,
actually,
right?
Yeah, almost. Yeah, I'm
McLaren,
looking at it because it's like Mercedes actually took
Ferrari.
second.
Yeah, 4.
It's pretty impressive. I think like the odd thing, and we kind of alluded to this, like, because those top 4 teams and those top, let's say 7-8 drivers took so much of the points, like the bottom half was really the bottom half, right? And I was actually surprised. I guess I knew this, but I didn't know this, to see Williams was actually finished 7th over AlphaTauri.
Yep.
I mean, not only that,
Yuki's still going to come back. Like I don't know.
Depending on
like,
who you ask earlier in the season.
Yeah, I mean, I want Yuki to be there. Like I'm a huge fan, but it's weird that you would have such a poor performing team as like a sister team to like such a dominant champion team,
Yep.
Well, they're only allowed to copy so much of the homework.
Yeah,
and,
I guess.
I mean, they much like has been the way of things in the NHL this season, they decided to part ways mutually with Franz Tost at the end of the year. I think he's actually genuinely retiring, but
I was gonna say, it wasn't Yuki's helmet a picture of Franz? Yeah, so that feels like it was an amicable split. Let that man ride off into the sunset.
I think Yuki has genuine love for Franz because he made him stop being a teenager and being like, hey, you're kind of a professional race car driver now. You're going to come live with me. It literally like made him move to Italy and live with the team essentially, and like go running and like start working on his fitness and stuff. And honestly, if it wasn't for some of the things that Lando did when he had the right car, I would put Yuki as the best driver.
Would you say most improved? How about most improved? Like, who would you give most improved to? Like, because this is something I was also kind of thinking about as we were doing our pregame. In Formula One, we only care about P1 in constructors and drivers. But if we tried to take, let's say, an Americanized approach in terms of, hey, there are like 5 awards we give. Like, who's your Rookie of the Year? Who's your MVP? Who's your MVP that's not Max Verstappen? Who's been the biggest disappointment? Like, those are the things in my mind. It's a very hard question, or it's an interesting question. I'll say it that way. It's not hard because I think arguments could be made for a number of different drivers. And I think ultimately, if we're being honest with ourselves as sports watching public, that's what we want.
Yeah. I guess I would have to give it to Yuki.
As most improved.
It's hard because Lando's already set a really high bar, but I also think that he got legitimately better. Like he's entering his like sounds weird to say, but like his peak phase, because I still think he has like room to grow or whatever, but I think he's finally got enough years under his belt in F1 to know how good he is, and I feel like he lacked with confidence in his first several years in F1. But like Yuki got everything thrown at him and he beat everybody that was thrown at him. DR, Liam Lawson, Nick DeVries, like pretty handedly. So, yeah, I guess I'd have to give it to Yuki.
Yuki Tsunoda, pillar of consistency. Speaking of pillar of consistencies, Nick, like, what about you? Like, who has been somebody that caught your eye from a driving perspective or a most improved driver candidate?
I mean, I feel the same way that Todd feels about Lando, right? Like, I think honestly, the most improved anything on the track this year is the McLaren team, right? Consistency, like putting cars out there that are competitive every race. Like they just haven't done that, right? And that adds to Lando's confidence. is obviously why Oscar is, kind of coming out like
He's a
blazing
rookie
hot.
of the year,
Yeah,
as far as I'm
I was
concerned.
gonna say too.
That's easy.
Yep.
There's no debate there.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge thing. Like the thing that's really interesting is like, so like with Red Bull, right? Like Max has the confidence in those Honda engines. Red Bull has the confidence in those Honda engines. It doesn't translate down to AlphaTauri for some reason. The same thing kind of happens in the Mercedes world. But now we're seeing McLaren actually have the confidence in everything, almost to the point of, will they beat Mercedes again, right? Like there's definitely, like the possibility of that happening next year. I think that the weird part about like the improvement side of things driver wise is there's so many variables it makes it really difficult. Like with the NBA, you can look and say, hey, this guy brought it, more rebounds, more assists, more points, points or whatever the point differential is while he's on the court. In racing, it's a little bit tough to say like the driver specifically like made drastic improvements, because Yuki's kind of the only guy that you could say like this guy ran through like his direct competition and beat them every time through. Like,
Yep.
There's nobody else that really had that. So,
yep.
I guess I go with Yuki in that instance as well.
I think for me, most improved is really an interesting topic, because if we are looking at it from the NBA sense, it almost feels like with most improved, you can reward it to two different type of players. One is truly the most improved player, meaning somebody that kind of came out of nowhere and rose his or her level to, let's say, an above average or an all-star level. And then there are people, like I'll use the famous instance, I think Ja Morant won most improved player because he made that leap from perennial all-star to superstar. And if that's the case, for me, I get the Yuki argument. I think it's probably the better one to make. But if I'm being devil's advocate, I look at somebody like Alex Albon as the most improved, considering where he is with that Williams and the fact that he's able to do more impressive things in that Williams car than Yuki was able to do. And not to take anything away from Yuki, because like you guys said, I did not have Yuki being the destroyer of Formula One dreams in terms of how many people he essentially slammed the door on within his own organization.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting take. The reason why I didn't say Albon is because I really thought Albon in the Red Bull car was going to be something that we was. I don't think like. I thought Albon at Red Bull would be like a long-term thing. Like I thought he had a ton of potential. That I know there's a lot of variables at Red Bull. There's a lot of ego and like all of those things. But I think like, I guess if we're relating to basketball, it's like I could never look at anybody on the 72-10 Bulls or the or the Warriors.
I mean, a more modern day example is like a Golden State Warrior, right?
Yeah.
Like taking somebody here, like if Jordan Poole actually knew how to play the game of basketball in the team sense, him going from Golden State to Washington and then possibly coming back because he's shown that maturity, that's what Alex Albon is actually doing. Where I still think, to your point, Nick, he was probably as unfairly booted out of his chair the same way Pierre Gasly was. And the thing about Albon is he just keeps his head down and he keeps driving, and he does things like not stopping during an entire race unless it's on the absolute last, or he's a tire master. Like that's the thing that I'm most impressed by from an Albon perspective, because there is a versatility to his driving game that I don't necessarily see with Yuki.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it's a flip of the coin with either of them, to be honest. Like I said, looking at the standings, I didn't realize that Williams did beat out AlphaTauri. Like it's pretty crazy to think.
I mean, not only that, and then this will be the end of my Alex Albon soapbox. One of the most startling stats to me is of the 28 points that Williams scored, Albon scored 27. That's fantastic. Like we've always talked about the fact that in this sport, your ability to banish or vanquish, I wasn't sure which one I was going to go. I think I was going to go with vanquish, if that's even a word. Your ability to vanquish your fellow driver and your team is essentially what makes you a truly great driver. And granted, it's very easy to overturn a rookie like Logan Private, but at the same time, it still has to be impressive what he's done.
Agreed. I think Banquish is those TV dinners, right? Those old school, like
the
Banquet?
dollar
Banquet? Banquish.
Sure. Banquish.
That sounds. That doesn't.
I feel
sound
like
out
that's
of-
a Scandinavian rapper that's about to take the Spotify world by storm. I am
Vanquish.
young Vanquish, yeah.
So Albon, the reason I can't give him like most improved is because he also wasn't really challenged. Like, Mr. What the fuck is a kilometer? Like, literally, we talked about it in the pre-show. Excuse me. He stumbled into a P10. That was his one point because somebody got disqualified. Was that though in Austin when Lewis?
I
got
think it was an
DQ'd?
American race, and I will say this: I love a good conspiracy theory when it's not political. That was a bankroll point if I've ever seen one. Something just felt off with that dude.
Yeah, like I'd honestly pay to see like if they had a pay-per-view of just like failed F1 stars and they put in like Latifi and Nick DeVries and Logan Sargent and whatever that Indian dude's name was from like 2014.
I'll look it up.
2015?
It's not. I'll look it up. Keep going.
You
son of a
know what I'm
bitch.
talking about? Anyway, just like a race in a spec car series of who's like the worst driver, I would literally pay for a pay-per-view of that 100%. But like Albon to me is the best driver not in the top 10.
Okay.
Like he like kind of Nick was saying like I had really high hopes for him in the Red Bull seat, but he crumbled under the massive weight of one Helmut Marko. And that's a pretty common theme there. Unless you're a robot like Max, you just don't do well in the chamber of fear that is Red Bull.
By the way, were you talking about Karun Chandokak?
No, Karun Chandok was actually a decent driver. I can't remember his name. Maybe I've got the year
Narain
wrong.
Karthik Kayan? I'm really setting my people back by butchering these names.
No, there was one Indian driver, and I want to say it was like in the early to mid 2010.
I'm literally at the Wikipedia page for Formula One drivers from India. There's only been two. Narain Karthik Kayan. He
must be him then, and you're just butchering it because that doesn't sound familiar at all. But he was shit. He was like barely making the 107%.
He was on the Jordan and the HRT teams. I'm hoping that kickstarts something for you.
Whatever.
I mean, you just got to realize, Todd, that
point.
like even guys like Jason Caffey and Dickie Simpkins got rings with the 72 and 10 Bulls. So sometimes stumbling your way into victory is just the way it has to be done.
Which is fine. Like I understand why the Latifis and the Strolls and the Sargents of the world are in there because it is a pay to play sport. I get that. If they fucking signed, excuse my language, they signed Logan Sargent next year. Williams confirmed him for the seat next year. So whatever his oil-rich daddy threw down to make Williams keep him, I'd love to like have 1% of that because I'm sure it was a whole lot of money. But like, the point of that whole thing was that like Albon is a hell of a driver, but he also wasn't challenged, so he can't be MVP. But I do want to know
MIP.
Oh, sorry. Who's your worst? Who's your most, not worst because that's Sargent, but who's your most disappointing driver of the year?
I'll give you one, and it's off the beaten path for me, but I have high expectations for this person. I think Esteban Ocon was a pretty big disappointment for me because I assumed that he would be the number one driver in Alpine, and I think Alpine was the team that disappointed me the most because I had higher hopes for them than I did almost anybody else. And to see them actually take a step back because we're so used to them being the fifth place team. Like that was almost as inevitable as a Max Verstappen win in a lot of these years. And now to see them, I think, in sixth, something's broken. And I thought Ocon being the senior driver, he would kind of have the measure of Gasly in a way. And when you look at the actual driver standings, Gasly scored 4 more points than them. And I think that ultimately is the conundrum that Alpine faces. Who's the better driver? I think Gasly is more consistent, but Ocon has a higher ceiling. Like Ocon is very likely to pull a podium place as he is to crash out of a race because he ran into his own teammate. Gasly just plays by the rules a little bit better.
I'm so glad you said that. I was about to make the same joke myself.
That's
Nick.
high-minded.
Who's your most disappointing?
I mean, I'd probably agree with that. Ocon.
But Ocon also got a podium in Monaco and a 4th place in Vegas. That, on the surface, is a fairly successful season for a non-top 5 team driver, I would assume.
I feel like the podium in Monaco was circumstantial. I think he had a good race.
I just reward the results as I see them. Somebody had to get it.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, like I think I'm probably equally disappointed with like the Haas team. Like I thought Hulkenberg would Mr. Consistent his way into something, and I feel like they just were consistently at the bottom.
And to me, the other disappointment is the lack of points that Magnussen scored. Like 1 point for the whole year. Was it 3?
Yeah,
3 points. I thought that would have been a fairly close battle between those two, because I think outside of Ferrari, if you would ask me what is the most competitive team in terms of driver equivalency, I would say Haas.
Yeah, I think that this is a tough question to answer too, because my expectations weren't high for anybody at the bottom of the grid. You know, like my expectations for Magnussen, for Hulkenberg were probably a little bit more than the rest. Honestly, like I'm even disappointed that Valtteri Bottas didn't, perform better. I feel like that car is capable. I feel like Guan Yu Zhou is probably going to be like around for a significant more amount of time, and will probably do better than Valtteri in the next couple of years if he's even around. I mean, honestly, he's probably going to retire from Formula One and just sell, OnlyFans, right? Like at this point, like that's.
I'm ready for the Valtteri Bottas man thong collection.
God, that was a good calendar. I'm sad I didn't get one. But good on him for raising so much money for charity. That was awesome. But you nailed my answer, Nick. Valtteri, Mr. Boat Ass.
Terry
is, and there's no question about this, is a better driver than Zhou Guan Yu. The car was capable at times, and I don't know what, like he was in no man's land most of the time. I know he struggled with getting through traffic in his time at Mercedes, like the off qualifyings he would have. He'd qualify in like P13 or something and struggle to make his way back up, even with a car that was faster than the field. But I guess I had higher hopes for him in I know that the car wasn't always there, but like leading the team, and it very much felt like, even though it doesn't say that on the score sheet, that Zhou Guan Yu outperformed Terry at most points in the season. Maybe it's given the confidence for his new hairstyle, which if you haven't seen, please go to Zhou Guan Yu's Twitter.
Is this a performance issue with Valtteri and his mustache mullet combination causing too much drag?
What the fuck? Are you kidding me, Zhou?
I can't believe you hadn't seen that.
Why would I see him without a helmet on? Like, he is the most nondescript driver on the grid. Is this an homage to Lil Pump? Like, what is this?
It sure is. He is the most fashionable person on the grid.
Sneakerhead, for sure.
No, I just think he's the most fashionable person on the grid. I think Lewis's stuff is just too try hard. His hairstyle choice, that
the tarantula, as I like to call it.
I know that's a thing in Asia now, like in their streetwear style. But man, you're that's not you, buddy.
There's an American phrase that deals with follicle accumulation or degradation, depending on how you want to look at it, which is "come on home." Come on home, Guan.
Yeah.
Come on home. You don't have to shave it bald like we do in the American sense of "come on home," but come on home.
Yep. Okay. Did we sufficiently recap? Do we have any other season notes?
What's the most surprising team? Like, I'm not talking about teams like constructors' points. I'm talking about the teams themselves. Like, go for it.
I've got a weird one. This might not make sense, but Mercedes.
All right.
Because, follow me here. For a lot, okay. So they built a car. They completely ignored like 1.5 of their drivers. They ignored Lewis completely when they said that they I don't know if this is going to get into a weird techie space, but Lewis said the last car, the driver and the cockpit of the car was moved too far forward, and that was because of the whole zero pod design. They kept a lot of that DNA in this year's car when they finally abandoned the zero pod thing. They kept a lot of that DNA in the car, but it made the car like a little too on the nose and like unpredictable under braking. Lewis hated it. He stated in the offseason he hated it. He told the engineers like, this sucks. George kind of agreed with that apparently, but they kept going with it. And the car definitely had its struggles off and on through the season. Like, it was pretty slow at the beginning of the year. Maybe in the end of the first third, it kind of picked up pace, and then they had a lull, and then they were up and down all over the season. But for them to get what did they finish second, right? Yeah,
they did finish second in the constructors.
P2, yeah, for them to beat Ferrari, who had, I would say, more ups than downs, or at least compared to Mercedes. McLaren, who started the first half of the year with a dog shit car, for the Mercedes to beat both of them. And Aston, peaked early and then fell off basically for the rest of the season, except for maybe the very end when they had some pace. But for them to end up P2 in the constructors is so surprising. And I think, Ro, you've said this a million times. They're just, they're professionalism. Yeah, they're like clockwork. They don't make silly mistakes most of the time. But for them to end up P2 in the constructors is really surprising to me. I would have put them P4 if you take everything that you know about the car, about the team on paper. So yeah, that was a huge upside for me.
I mean, look at it this way, right? A year ago, they were P3, 515, and we were just wondering, is this over? Now, fast forward a year, we're no longer speaking in those kind of somber eulogy tones of, is this over? We think they may have a shot at something. We don't know what it is, but that's the pleasure of the word something. It can be a snowball. It can be an avalanche. The thing that I find most interesting going into next year is if things are done properly, we will find out next year who truly is the P1. Because my argument is, in Russell's first year as a Mercedes driver, I thought he won the round 10-9 to Lewis. I think this year Lewis had a bit of a resurgence and kind of said, hey, I've still got some tricks up my sleeve. And I almost scored 10-8 to Lewis this year. And that being said, it's always a 3-year evaluation process for me, because you always have 1 year where if you're brand new to a sport, you have the element of surprise. You can surprise people because people don't have the tape on you, so you can get away with a lot. That second year, people have too much tape on you, and they're going to go out of their way to make sure you don't score in the ways that you're likely to score. So that third year is when we evaluate a player properly, and I think that's what is going to be the most interesting subplot for me from a Mercedes perspective going into 24.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really interesting. I think the dynamic between Lewis and George is also really fascinating to me, because people, I'm not pointing directly at Todd if you're not watching the video version of this, but I'm pointing to Todd with my thoughts here. Like, Todd always undervalues Lewis's placement on the track and his finishing, right? Like, we've gone through, like, the season where, like, it's like surprising how far ahead Lewis is, like, of George, because it always feels like George is right there with him. But like, Lewis beat him by 64 points. Like, you can count some of that to team issues, blah blah blah. But like, that's a pretty handy little ass whooping, for a team member, right? Like, if anybody else beat the other team member with a car as capable of a Mercedes car, we wouldn't even be talking about the second driver like this. And I also know that there's like a big changing of the guard that will happen with Lewis and George at some point. They're both signed for a couple more years, I think, right? So it's like, we know this will eventually be a talking point that everyone is talking about. But I do think that they made some pretty impressive improvements like throughout the season. I personally, like, when I think of the team, I got to go back to McLaren just because if you would have bet me, I would have lost everything betting that McLaren would never come close to touching Red Bull in a pit stop. And they turned multiple 1.9s, a 1.8, like their pit crew, like chef's kiss, man, like unbelievable, because they were in the like 3 to 5 second range for a solid like 2-3 years. It felt like, where it was like nothing was ever going right. So to me, that was like the biggest wow factor from one of the teams, where it's just like, shit, like they're actually like, they're doing it, like they're showing up and like showing out in a way that like they just hadn't before. So I think that's also like, to next year is just going to be incredible to watch. Like, the more confidence these teams get, the better it's going to be for everybody that watches,
I will say, like, speaking on McLaren, like, if we would have talked at the beginning of the year, no chance would I have thought that they would have a competitive car at any point of the year. And they were legitimately the fastest on track in a couple of races. So
yeah,
another good surprise as a diehard sad papaya fan.
Yeah, I think for me, the most surprising team is Ferrari, because I think we put a lot of stock in Vassar coming in, being what we called at the time an adult in the room, and not succumbing to what I felt Bonato did, which was what Todd previously alluded to as remnants of the Chamber of Fear. I don't think it was a full chamber, but it might have been a little nook or an enclave, depending on how classy you are as an individual, maybe a mudroom. But it was also one of the thoughts that I continue to sound like a broken record over this. I still think Sainz is a better driver. It literally took back-to-back podiums for Charles to overtake him from a points perspective at the end of the year. And I also am going to say this on record. I think no driver would benefit more from a change in scenery than Charles Leclerc. But unfortunately, I think he is the most stuck driver in his team outside of Max Verstappen. And that is really going to be...
him? Sorry to interrupt you there.
No.
I'm pretty sure they just signed Leclerc to 2029.
No, but what I'm saying is this. Even if they hadn't signed him, the way that they've always spoken about how this is his birthright, his godfather race for this team, he's from Monaco. Ferrari has always been in his blood. He was as close as a legacy as we're going to get, not in a biological sense, the way Lance Stroll is with the Racing Point or Aston Martin. Like, Leclerc would never move because of external forces. Let's call it that. But I think he would benefit the most from it, because I do think there's a crippling pressure that comes with that sort of need to fulfill his godfather's legacy, his own legacy. And I don't think he will ever win a title at Ferrari, but he's more likely to win a title elsewhere. And just kind of still watching that come to some sort of conclusion where, yeah, he beat Carlos this year. I'll take my L in that regard, but I still don't think it's going to do his career any good the longer he stays there, and which, to Todd's point, now is through 2029.
I think...
In fact, let me ask you this, and then I'll stop talking after this. From now until 2029, do you see Charles... I'll give you an over-under of 0.5 world championships, Charles Leclerc. Are you taking the over, or are you taking the under?
For sure.
I like it.
Ooh.
While Todd debates that,
that's really tough.
Let me throw some points out here about it, because
go.
I think the thing that like, we talk about the Chamber of Fear at some of these teams, right? Although it doesn't feel like it for the last, well, to Todd's point earlier, 14 years, whatever it's been since Ferrari was really like truly competitive, 15 years, whatever it's been. Ferrari is still like absolutely the team that expects to win over every other team. Like, Red Bull and Mercedes are still young punks in this sport. Like, nobody expects them to win. Like, they aren't built on winning Formula One. Like, Ferrari is what? 16, 17 titles? I mean, and it's crazy to like get into that like legacy now, because Williams has 9 or 10, and we would never think of them as winning a title. But I do think Ferrari being as like dependent on racing, and I would say slash racing in its blood, because it's a very like flip of the coin approach to their business. They have to win at Formula One in order for this to make sense. Like, in order for their business to work and like succeed in the way that it always has. If you look at street cars, and I know like I go down this path probably too often on here, but if you look at street cars, people don't care about the Ferraris the way they used to. Like legacy, vintage Ferraris, of course, like a little bit older Ferraris, yes. Like the people that grew up wanting a Ferrari can now maybe go after a Ferrari. But the new cars out of the gate, the new production vehicles, Ferrari doesn't have, over the last 4 to 5 years, doesn't have, or maybe even 10 years, doesn't have the excitement that they used to have just straight out of the gate. I personally think that's Michael Schumacher winning for, how 6-7 years straight. I think there's a direct correlation to that happens after the fact. And I think Ferrari as a company off the racetrack has to start winning on the racetrack in order for people to get excited about them the way that they once were. And I also think that they are they've got to figure out what they're going to do with sports car racing and Formula One. Because, right, like they're going to Le Mans. They like these are things that like these two worlds don't exist together in our conversations. But it feels a lot like they've got some good things going on the other side of their business in the racing world. And they, for some reason, like lost focus with the Formula One aspect. And I have faith in the legacy of that brand coming back around. And honestly, like Leclerc is a great driver. I don't know if he's long-term world championship winner, but he's definitely an in-between, Max and whoever the next 5-year run is type of driver, in my opinion.
I guess I would question your question with a question, because in that context, are you assuming that Charles Leclerc is with Ferrari until 2029?
Because my question, to answer your question, to answer Nick's question, to get my question was over under Ferrari championships from now until 2029 at 0.5.
Okay. Under.
So no shot.
No,
so
it's
we're not
it's no shot. It's, you said it yourself. Carlos Sainz is not a better driver, but he's a more consistent driver.
Oh no, I said he's a better driver.
I know you said it.
Yeah,
I'm correcting, caveating. Carlos Sainz is a more consistent driver than Charles Leclerc, and that's the reason why Charles Leclerc, I think, won't win a world championship with Ferrari. Because you can't have you can't be a consistent racing driver unless you're Fernando Alonso, while having to make your own strategy decisions. Like, Carlos Sainz is out there like, nope, we're boxing this lap. I'm coming in, just so you know. Like, I'm not giving you plan E. I'm coming in this lap. And Charles Leclerc is like, oh, okay, Daddy, I won't box this lap. And that's literally what it takes. Like, excuse me, my throat's scratchy. Max is out there, like, GP tells him like, hey, let's manage the tires, and Max is like, okay, fastest lap. Like, that's what it takes. You have to like have that killer instinct. Charles Leclerc is super fast when he's on, but he also is like knife edge super fast. It's the qualifying in Monaco where he's on pace to take pole, clips the wall, wrecks the car, and then can't start the race. That's like, I feel like that's going to be his legacy.
So I have a question. So I feel like in order to be competitive with someone that's as dominant as Max, you literally have to be pushing your limits to where it's either I hit the wall or I win. And sometimes you're going to hit the wall.
Okay.
Like, especially someplace like Monaco. But like, I know like we're saying that Carlos is more consistent, but is he? Like, it feels like Charles has been on the podium way more than Sainz.
It does, and it's almost a mirror image to the Alpine situation in the sense that we think Gasly is a more consistent driver. Charles may have more consistent highs, but then the other issue is Charles Leclerc's body language betrays him in a way that Carlos's doesn't. The best thing I can say about Carlos Sainz, and I've said this before, is he just puts his head down and drives. There are situations where Sainz will nick a wall or he'll hit something. He does not let out a blood-curdling scream the way Charles does. Like, I can't think of a no from Carlos Sainz. There's a reason why he's the smooth operator.
Well, he did. Remember when they took away his podium? No. That's not fair. No. He was so calm about it. I think he actually cried too.
And I do think that, like, Todd makes a great point, right? Like, it seems insane, but like you kind of have to be even more of a dick than you are normally in order to be like a championship winner, right? Like, you have to have ultimate confidence in your own decisions over whatever people on the pit are telling you, right? Like, because once you get into that this mentality of like the back and forth, or even thinking about it, like, this is something that like we don't hear all the radio communications, but I would love to have the stats to see what drivers talk about switching positions with their teammate most frequently and least frequently. Because I bet you the people that are just like, that don't give a shit about that and just drive are consistently outperforming the ones that are like, shouldn't we be, like, I know Russell does it occasionally, like, where it's like, should we switch, or can he stick around and give me a tow, and like, like playing the team game. And I'm there's nothing wrong with playing the team game. Frankly, this season, if you're not playing the team game to win second in the constructors, what are you doing, right?
What are you doing?
But it does feel like Charles just doesn't have that like killer instinct on his own, and maybe that's something that he comes into in the next couple of years,
But Nick, this is where I think I like how you frame this, which is you have to embrace your inner dick to try and compete max dickishness. But the thing is, I think Charles does do a better job of tapping into that. But it's the Wario meme at what cost? Because every time he does try to tap into it, and he does it more than Carlos does, it leaves him a broken man. And it's almost that Carlos Sainz knows himself better, that I don't have to be that guy, and I'm still going to get the same results as my teammate, who does have to be that dickish kind of guy, and who, until I'm proven wrong, has historically shown he can't handle the failure that comes along with being aggressive.
Because I think that's like taking that a step further, right? Like, we talk about this with like the earlier days of Max being aggressive, the early days of Seb, of Lewis, all being very aggressive. One thing that I noticed this year more than I have in previous years, mainly because like I guess like there was moments where Max had to fight through the field to get back to the front. Nobody is willing to, for lack of a better term, put Max into the wall, right? Like Max can go the furthest, he can take the worst line into a corner ever, and nobody will like let him run into them. Nobody will make contact with him. Like, he probably didn't make contact with more than 2 or 3 cars the entire season, even though we know he had to fight through a bunch of cars many times. And I think that's partly because he's such a dick off the track, right? Like, I'm sure that guys don't want to deal with him complaining. Like, look, if the 3 of us line up and we race, who do you think we're like the most fearful of, like, speaking to after a race? It's Max. Anybody else on the track feels like a human being. Max doesn't. Like, so all the drivers like dance around him. I can't remember who it was. Somebody in Vegas. Maybe it was George Russell, if I'm remembering right. But like, he obviously, like, it was a blind spot. He didn't see him, whatever. But like, the knee-jerk reaction to get out of the way versus just letting the contact happen. And I get there's billions of dollars at stake. You don't want to hear it from your bosses that you just wrecked a car. But also, like, if you're always playing like the I got to get out of Max's way role, you're always going to get out of Max's way and he's always going to win, right? Like, that's just how it works. Because like,
Yep.
I think like Max is even more strategic than he was 3-4 years ago, right? We've said that in previous episodes. But the problem is he's also more aggressive than he ever has been into a lot of those situations.
I think he uses the power of
Yeah,
his
that's
perceived
what I mean.
aggression as much of a psychological tool as
Yeah.
his actual racecraft. Like, he knows he has that reputation, and he knows when to lean in on it, and he knows when to kind of pull back from it.
Oh, he's definitely grown in that, like the ethereal racing side of it,
Yep.
massively in the last couple of years. But he's also had a car under him in the last, year plus that he didn't have to worry about it. Like, he can be like, okay, you can overtake me in this corner. I know I'll get you on pace.
And that's more startling than him bearing down on you. It's just that casualties of, I'm going to get this back, so you do you, big guy.
I just don't know if we've had somebody that's had a consistent enough car to battle that, because I still think Lewis would give it to him. I think George would give it to him. Fernando absolutely would give it to him if he had the car that would keep up. So I don't know if I agree, or I can see somewhat like his persona of aggression having a mental edge, but it's also like, I know I can't hang with his car, the pace of his car, so just why fight it? I did just look up stats though to go back to my argument for Sainz versus Leclerc. I'm way wrong on the consistency piece. Carlos Sainz has 18 podiums and 34 DNFs.
Hey.
Charles Leclerc has 30 podiums and 17 DNFs.
So mirror images of one another.
Wow.
And is that during their entire career or just
I did do entire career. So like Sainz has been in F1 a fair amount longer than Leclerc. Which actually speaks to Leclerc's dominance even more.
Oh, absolutely. But I would be very interested to see, if you slice and dice it, what do the Ferrari stats look like?
Actually, only two of. Leclerc's all Ferrari. He didn't have any podiums with Alpha.
With Sauber, okay.
Yeah. And Sainz only had 2 podiums with McLaren, so
fair
15
enough.
Really.
Okay.
But I would still, betting man, or like I'm a team principal and I need somebody that's just going to get me consistent points, like shades of Nico Hulkenberg of past. I would still pick Sainz.
Yeah, but that's exactly why I say Leclerc will come into his own in that, confidence, right? Like,
he just doesn't seem like that dude to me.
He doesn't have the dog in him.
Now. You're not that.
Does he have the dog in him?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it is interesting because like Sainz has 2 years more experience, right? Like, I think that definitely plays into these guys' confidence. The other thing that's really interesting too to think about, like Leclerc, is like, all these guys being friends is maybe detrimental to their ability to come into that like competitiveness that they need to be in. I don't know if that makes sense, but like I feel like Leclerc is friends with Lando, is friends with Verstappen. Like, they all seem to be fairly close in that top 5 or whatever. And like, to me, that's not like, there's very few people that can be in that situation. Max being one of them, Michael Jordan being the other, who's like, yeah, we're great friends. We're going to go gamble and play golf together. But if we're on the court, I'm coming to kill you. Like, that's the mentality, right?
Oh, like the Kobe
exactly.
in the Olympics versus
Pau.
Pau Gasol. I don't know. Like, I feel like they have, with the exception of Max and Lewis, I think they like have a like kind of a hatred respect for each other. They recognize game, but like
he's
they
a
don't
little familiar.
They don't want anything to do with each other. All of the rest of the drivers seem like they could like go get a beer together. So unless Lewis gets a fast car, I don't know if we're going to see that pure like give it everything racing I mean, who knows? Maybe Lando gets a fast car and he's just like, all right, like, Max, we can chum it up, but
Yeah.
like, if you're in my way on the track, it's over. I just don't see anybody but Max having that, like, I'm a robot. I'm here to do my job.
I think that I don't think anybody will have that level of robot, but I do think that once once you get that first true taste of victory, it might change you. Like so with Lando, like there's definitely an element of like, hey, you win a race, you probably keep that foot down a little bit longer to win the next one if you have to.
Maybe I don't know. He had that weird year, like where when Daniel was coming into McLaren and everybody expected them to be the best friends, where he tried to get like super serious and not be goofy Lando. But this last year, he feels like he's back to normal. Like, I'm gonna make a fart joke, kind of like having fun, Lando. You know what I mean?
See, I thought he was the same Lando he'd always been. It's just he was he was far superior of a driver than Danny Rick was, that it just got uncomfortable, and then he's like, well, I guess I have to be serious. But
Which the weird thing out of all of that is that they did really become like good friends out of those couple years together at McLaren. Even though,
But
like,
I almost felt like it was after the fact. Like I felt they got better along. Like there was a weird tension with them, and I always think when you have a two-person team, the way most Formula One teams are, you need competitive balance, and that's why I thought Lando and Sainz were a match made in heaven, because Sainz is perfectly okay being the straight man, and Lando is perfectly okay only being the funny guy, and that's where I thought their friendship blossomed organically in a way that I just thought you had two alphas with Lando and Danny Rick in terms of a personality thing.
Yeah, I can see that. But you're right on the competitive balance thing. Like they were having fun while, you got me last race, I got you this race, kind of thing.
Yep.
So let's go a little bit further into that to wrap up this episode. How does that competitive balance work? Like who? This sounds really fucked up, but like Max is the winner and Checo is the loser. Like that's competitive balance. I mean,
No, that's not competitive balance. That's just domination. And when you have somebody that dominant that they single-handedly win the title, there's no concept of competitive balance. But from a personality perspective, I do think that there are certain beta tendencies that a good number two driver have, that they have to lean a little bit more than a number one driver has to as being an alpha. Like I think it's harder to be
totally
a number two
agree,
than a
but
number
like, how
one.
does that relate to like a team finishing the season? Like in terms of the competition, because like Lewis and Bottas is a great 1-2 where it's like one dominant and one, Cal Naughton, Ricky Bobby combo, right? But like at some point when it flips, the egos flip and the wife leaves and goes to the other guy's pits, and it's just it gets ugly.
Hey man, that's my concho. That's my concho. Okay, the Magic Man. But okay, Nick, if you're okay to do a game with me, I'm gonna go through the top 5 constructor teams. You explain to me the dynamic between them in terms of competitive balance. Red Bull number 1. Like, how would you define their competitive balance if such a thing
agree.
exists?
There's no balance there, right? Like it's Max versus everyone.
I think Checo loses sleep over how much he hates Max, and Max doesn't care about Checo.
Yeah,
he's not even
I don't
concerned.
think Max will. Like Max has never sent in holiday cards to Checo in any way, shape, or form.
Oh no, he is, but it's the most debilitating and douchey way of like, I don't even consider you a threat. In fact, here's $500 for your kid. Like, you're not going to beat me anytime soon. Yeah. Okay, number 2 is Mercedes. Like, how would you describe that balance? Because that to me feels like it's equally poised after 2 years. Because, like we said earlier, I think George got him in the first year, Lewis got him this year.
I just think Lewis had an off year. We talked earlier about disappointments. I was pretty disappointed in Russell this year. He felt most times when he wasn't having a good race that he was trying to like
It's trying too hard.
piss and moan about it or blame it on somebody else or something else. Like, you just had an off day, Chief. Like, or you just don't have the pace today, whatever it was. I think he's a good driver. I don't think that he has yet lived up to the hype that they said, like, oh, we have Lewis, and like Lewis is the next Lewis, like his replacement. I just don't see that yet.
Now, to
I was
me,
just gonna say, and I think
go ahead.
Lewis's off year, coming off of 2021, like I would not expect anything different from any human being. You know, like easily the most disappointing season of his entire life, right? Whether it was great racing or not, and whether it was like however you feel it ended, like it's just like that's got to be the most disheartening, you know.
Mercedes is essentially, to me, modern day Los Angeles Lakers, where you have LeBron, aka Lewis. He's a GOAT to a lot of different people. And then you have this anointed next one. But the next one, in this case, the Anthony Davis, is George Russell. And there are moments of fragility, whether it be physically in Anthony Davis's case or whether it be seemingly mentally with George Russell. So the last thing I will leave you with in terms of Mercedes stat is George Russell scored 100 less points this year than he did last year. That's a startling jump to me. I don't know how you two perceive that, but going from 275 in 22 to 175 this year, like, is that type of decline normal, or am I onto something with that?
No, I feel like that's a really good stat to highlight, because arguably Mercedes had a better car this year than they did last year.
I agree. Honestly, I think Russell's biggest challenge is the opposite of Sainz and the consistency, right? Like I feel like if I'm betting on drivers, I'm never confident in where Russell is going to come out and land. You know, like everyone else, I can pretty much say within a spot or two where they should be, you know, even, you know, throwing out my hope for Lando winning a race. Like I can be pretty consistent in saying like, yeah, that person's not going to land more than one or two spots off of this. You know, Russell is just like, you just never know. Like it seems like it's just at the whim of his emotion.
Yep. Going on with the rest of this parlor game, we talked a little bit about Ferrari's competitive balance. Do you guys want to add anything else to the discussion we had prior?
No, I think those two guys are so closely competitive that it's kind of interesting. Like I don't think that's a problem within that team. I think that the problems have been with the organization as a whole, obviously, because the pit strategies still are just
shit
not there. So
I was gonna say we could beat that dancing horse or prancing horse into the ground. But one stat from a Ferrari perspective that I found fascinating: they scored 406 points. Leclerc got 206. Sainz got 200. That was the closest gap. Leclerc got 50.74% of their points. Like that is razor thin in terms of a margin. So I agree with you, Nick, in terms of competitive balance. Up next is a team that's really personal to both of you. It's your beloved Team Papaya, McLaren. Like, what do you make of that competitive balance after just 1 year?
It's hard with like such a small sample size, but I would put it also at that razor thin. I know Lando had the bulk of the points.
Not as much as you would think. Lando only had 70. Where is McLaren? Lando had 67% of their points this year. So 2 out of every 3 points was Lando.
So I would put that at being that, or giving the excuse to Oscar that it was his rookie year. I would still put that at almost a 50-50 partnership. I'm really excited for where Oscar goes in his second year. I'm hoping that the car's there going into 24, and I could see them, you know, fighting for P2 in the constructors.
So you know me, I love a good over-under. Lando scoring 58.5% of the points next year for McLaren. So dropping from 66 to 58.
I would still put over on Lando for that. Just because of he's going into his 6th year in Formula One. there's a chance we're going to have some sophomore slump moments for Oscar. We don't know where the car will be, but it's on the trajectory to be good. But, he's still going to have some rookie-ish mistakes, I'm sure. And also, I feel like the gap would have been bigger this year, but Lando had a couple spectacular failures, crashes, whatever this year.
I think Piastri obviously by far outperformed anything that anybody really expected of him. Because I think the other piece to that expectation is like nobody really expected the McLarens to find the consistency they did at the second half during the second half of the season.
They took a half of a season off and then they still finished where they finished.
Yeah.
That's very impressive to me.
Yep.
Like that's a sleeping giant.
I mean, I'm probably more optimistic towards that team going into next season than any other teams, just because there's the possibility that Piastri, has a sophomore slump situation, but like in general, like the positive energy and the trajectory of the team, nobody else is moving in the right direction all across the board the way that team is. Like everyone else has some issues to figure out. We're not going to get into it, but like even Mercedes has their off the track, shenanigans to deal with that are going to be distractions. And, like nothing's going to change about Red Bull. Like Checo's still going to be a really good driver that will very rarely win or podium because Max is the priority, rightfully so. So, yeah, it's going to be, I think McLaren's the most exciting team to watch next year.
Perfect. And let's end on a laugh. Talk to me about the competitive balance between the fifth place team, Todd's favorite team, Todd's favorite driver, Aston Martinovich with one Lance Strollovich, and some guy named Fernando.
Can you remind me of the point spread?
I would love to do that, Todd. Of the 280 points that Aston Martin scored, Fernando Alonso scored 206.
I mean, to be fair, that's still 2 out of 3 points, right?
Oh, it's closer to 3 out of 4.
Okay. Well, I'm not even going to rant. I'm too tired to rant about Lance Stroll right now.
He finished 10th in the drivers' standings. I think that says a lot for how good Aston Martin was out of the gates.
We talked about that in the pre-show. I was genuinely surprised that he finished P10 in the driver's standings. Good on him. He had a couple of good wet races in there. I made that joke.
Is that a joke?
It's not even a joke. I made that statement, I guess, a bunch of times. Lance Stroll is an idiot savant in the wet.
That's why he has a super hot girlfriend? Is that the joke you were going to make?
Nope. I sent a reel to Trevor the other day, our resident Canadian. It was sports car racing in the wet at Spa, like mega wet, and they're just going into a braking zone and spinning off. It was like Ferraris and Porsches and stuff crashing into each other, and he just replied with, "And Stroll takes the lead," which is a funny and perfectly said response. I mean, there is no competitive balance. Like, he's just here because his dad's name's on the door. Like,
yeah.
By the way, this is the best season he has had from a driver's standing perspective. I didn't look at the actual point totals as I'm going through all the seasons, but 10th is a pinnacle for him.
But he finally had a car to do it, right?
But did he, though? Because he didn't really do it for much of anything. This is a Fernando-led operation.
Well, yeah, but I think, was there any times where Fernando and Stroll both had a good race where Stroll beat him?
Let me look that up. I can do that for the next
episode.
Vegas,
I think in Vegas, Stroll was, 5th or 6th, something like that? He was pretty high up there. But didn't Fernando have something go wrong?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I mean, if you ask Fernando any race he didn't win, something went wrong.
Yeah,
so.
he got P1 if it wasn't
I'm going to hop in with Road's default question here. Over under number of Stroll family members in Formula One at the end of the 2024 season.
5? What's the line, Nick?
Got to be
complete
5, yeah.
Complete the play.
Over under?
I'll go over because I think
are we counting
Lawrence.
Daddy Strolovich in this?
Yeah, I am. That's why I'm going to say. In fact, I'll make the hot take that Lance is gone. His dad will still be around.
No chance. No chance. I'll take the.
Listeners, I believe we have our
day.
first bet for the next season.
Tune in next time.
I'll take the over all day on that.
We're agreeing on that then. We're both saying.
Wait, no.
Let's do the line at 1.5. Over under 1.5. Because you're saying both. I'm saying 1.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'll take the over. 100%.
Yeah. First juice box bet of 2024.
Tune in next week when we actually review the hot takes and said juice box bet from this year.
We got some good ones on the way too. They are definitely. Some of them are very cool hot takes, to be honest, but fun to read nonetheless.
Well, I mean, we know Dr. Evil's going to say something racist.
That's not a hot take. That's a statement. And before we kind of give our AKAs, and this will hopefully buy me time to come up with an OnlyFans one, I just wanted to say this. I had the fortune of going to my significant half's Christmas party where Miss Stephanie, probably our number one fan that's not in the Discord, and more importantly, not a dude, was very accommodating to us. She loved everyone's insight on this show, and she basically made me do an episode with her at this party, much to the chagrin of almost everybody there, including my wife and her husband, who is a very lovely gentleman who played professional hockey, so I will not say anything else about him other than he's a lovely gentleman. So thank you, Lane. Thank you, Miss Stephanie, and I appreciate you guys being fans of the show.
Stephanie, please come on the show. That would be
awesome. Also, for the folks that are not in our live studio audience, apparently the way to get into the live studio audience is just figure out where Rowett's holiday parties are, right? You can just catch them on the spot.
Yeah. That's at an undisclosed location that rhymes with Mucky Me's. Chuck E. Cheese, Todd.
That could have gone way
You're a father of two.
Okay, well, if a Thailand phrase didn't just enter your head there,
you can find me at OnlyFans on Fucky Feet. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, God. All right. That wraps it up, I think. Good enough season recap. Give us another one. I was actually fatigued by the end of the season of Formula One, and now I'm like, damn it, we have like 80 more days until...
I missed it. I'm glad we didn't do this episode right off the bat because I think it would have been not as funny and not as entertaining to us, and now it's a lot less depressing.
Very true. Hey, make sure to hit the first link in the description and join the Discord so you can continue the conversation in between episodes. You can follow the group at Exhaust Notes FM on all the platforms. You can find me, Nick Engvall, on all the platforms. I'm trying to use Threads more. I'm trying to get these guys to use Threads more so I can stop supporting the terrorists that run X, Twitter, Zitter, whatever it's called. But guys, let them know how they can find you outside of the show.
You can find me as the Punjabi Porpoiser on OnlyFans. I gave you another one, Todd. You asked for it. It's the holiday season. But actually, you can find me on X at Roheezy, on Instagram at Roadm. I guess Roadm on Threads. I posted my first thread, which was Happy Hip Hop Awareness, Flute Awareness Month. Shout out to Andre 3000. And yeah, maybe my New Year's resolution is one thread a month for the next 12 months. Todd, where can they find you?
You can find me at dadshoe.jpg. That's SHUE on Instagram. Dadshoe_JPEG on X, shitter, as we just named it. I'm dadshoe.jpg on Threads as well. You can find me on OnlyFans at Pumpernickels, which is alluding to what we're going to talk about with the wolves.
Oh, man.
Next week.
Thanks for watching, listening. Hey, leave us a review if you get a chance. We appreciate you. We'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
Bucky Bees.